After 3 years living together, she said, let's just be roommates, meaning I keep paying $2,800 rent while she dates other men freely. First I agreed, then I started dating her best friend who actually pays half, and my ex lost her mind when she got the eviction notice. Looking back now, I should have recognized the warning signs long before that Thursday evening in September when my girlfriend of 3 years sat me down for what she called an important conversation about our living arrangement. But when you're 31 and invested 3 years into what you thought was a solid relationship, you develop this remarkable ability to rationalize away behavior that should be setting off alarm bells. I'm Derek Mitchell, software developer at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, pulling in about $115,000 annually, doing work I genuinely enjoy. I'd bought my 2-bedroom condo in Capitol Hill 2 years ago for $485,000, right before the market got completely insane. Nothing fancy, but it had a decent kitchen, good natural light, and enough space for the home office setup I needed for the occasional remote work days. The kind of place where you could actually imagine building a life with someone. Melissa had moved in about 6 months after we started dating, right around the time her lease was ending, and she was complaining about rising rent prices in the city. She worked as a social media manager for a boutique marketing firm downtown, making around $42,000 a year, while maintaining an online presence that suggested she was pulling in triple that amount. Her Instagram showcased an endless stream of trendy restaurants, designer coffee shops, and carefully curated outfits that must have cost more than her monthly salary. From the beginning, our financial arrangement had been what she called proportional to income. I paid the $2,800, monthly mortgage, utilities, internet, and basically every fixed cost associated with the condo. She contributed $600 monthly, which she referred to as her household share, though I'd never quite figured out what specific expenses that covered. Groceries appeared on my credit card. Streaming services were under my accounts. Even her car insurance had somehow migrated to my family plan because it saved her money. I told myself it made sense given our income disparity. I told myself this was what partners did for each other. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be remarkably naive. The conversation started normally enough. Melissa had ordered Thai food from our usual place on my credit card, naturally, and we were settling in for what I assumed would be a regular Thursday evening of dinner and Netflix. Instead, she cleared her throat in that way people do when they've been rehearsing something difficult. Derek, we need to talk about our relationship, she said, setting down her pad thai with unusual seriousness. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I feel like we've reached a point where we need to redefine what we are to each other. My stomach dropped. This was clearly heading toward breakup territory, and I braced myself for the inevitable, "It's not you, it's me" speech that I'd heard variations of before. I think we're better as friends, she continued, watching my face carefully for reaction. We've built this amazing foundation together, this comfortable life, and I don't want to lose that. But romantically, I think we've evolved past that. We're more like really compatible roommates at this point. I sat there processing what she was saying, waiting for the other shoe to drop, because there was definitely another shoe coming. So, what I'm proposing, she said, gaining confidence as she outlined her plan, is that we transition to being roommates, friends who share living space. We keep everything else the same. I'll still contribute my $600 monthly. We'll still share the space, but we'll both have freedom to pursue other connections without the complications of a romantic relationship. There it was, the other shoe, dropping with all the subtlety of a concrete block. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said slowly. You want to break up with me but continue living here, paying $600 monthly while I cover the $2,800 mortgage and all other expenses, while you're free to date other people? It's not about dating other people, she said, though the slight flush on her cheeks suggested otherwise. It's about both of us having the space to grow as individuals. We've gotten so comfortable that we've stopped challenging each other. This way we can maintain the practical benefits of our living arrangement while allowing ourselves room for personal development. The audacity was almost impressive. She wanted to downgrade our relationship while maintaining all the financial benefits of dating someone who made nearly triple her salary. You know what, Melissa? You're absolutely right, I said, and I watched her face light up with surprised relief. We should definitely be roommates. Real roommates. Exactly, she smiled, clearly thinking this was going better than she'd anticipated. I'm so glad you understand. I was worried you might. Real roommates split rent equally, I interrupted, and utilities, and groceries, and they don't share streaming accounts or phone plans unless they're splitting those costs 50-50 too. The smile faltered. Derek, I meant we'd keep our current arrangement. Our current arrangement was based on being in a relationship, I said calmly. You just ended that relationship, so now we have a new arrangement. If you want to stay here as my roommate, Your share of expenses is $1,400 monthly. That's half the mortgage, plus half of utilities, which runs about $200, so call it $1,600 total. The color drained from her face as she did the math. $1,600 was more than a third of her monthly income before taxes. That's not realistic, she said. You know I can't afford that on my salary. Then I guess you'll need to find a different living situation. I replied, because I'm not going to subsidize my ex-girlfriend's lifestyle while she dates other men. That's not what roommates do. You're being petty and vindictive, she said, her voice rising. I thought we could handle this like adults. We are handling it like adults. Adults who break up typically don't continue living together unless there's a compelling financial reason for both parties. You want the compelling reason to be one-sided. I'm explaining why that's not going to work. She spent the next hour trying different approaches. Tears, anger, guilt trips about how I was punishing her for being honest about her feelings, appeals to our history together. But I held firm on the basic principle. If we weren't in a relationship, she didn't get relationship benefits. By the end of the evening, she'd retreated to the bedroom, which, I reminded her, would need to be vacated within 30 days per Washington state tenant law, since she'd never signed a lease or paid market rate rent. The next morning, I consulted with a real estate attorney friend who confirmed that since Melissa had never been on the mortgage or a formal lease and had been paying well below market rate for her room, she was essentially a guest who I could ask to leave with appropriate notice. I drafted a formal 30-day notice and left it on the kitchen counter before heading to work. When I got home that evening, Melissa was gone, along with most of her belongings. She'd left a note saying she was staying with friends and would collect the rest of her things over the weekend. The note also included several paragraphs about my cruelty and inability to understand that relationships evolve. I spent that evening on my couch, drinking beer and texting my best friend Connor about the situation. Bro, she literally tried to have her cake and eat it too, Connor wrote back. Good riddance. You deserve someone who actually contributes to the relationship. He wasn't wrong. But the condo felt empty and strange without Melissa's constant presence, even though that presence had been largely focused on her phone and social media rather than actual interaction with me. The unexpected development came 4 days later when Melissa's best friend Rachel showed up at my door. Rachel Chen was a physical therapist at Seattle Children's Hospital, someone I'd met dozens of times during my relationship with Melissa, but had never really talked to beyond basic pleasantries. She was standing in my doorway at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening, still in scrubs, looking exhausted and apologetic. Derek, I'm really sorry to just show up like this, she said, but I heard about what happened with Melissa, and there are some things you should probably know. I invited her in, genuinely curious about what could require an unannounced visit. First, I should tell you that Melissa and I are no longer friends, Rachel said, settling onto my couch. We had a massive falling out about 3 days ago when she moved into my spare room, and I discovered what she's actually like as a roommate. This was news. Melissa had mentioned staying with friends but hadn't specified that it was Rachel. What happened? I asked. Rachel laughed without humor. She moved in with 2 suitcases and immediately took over my entire apartment, used my expensive hair products without asking, had random guys over from dating apps. Yes, she's already on multiple dating apps while I was trying to sleep before 12-hour shifts. But the real issue was money. My stomach sank because I knew exactly where this was going. She promised to pay $800 monthly for the room and her share of utilities, Rachel continued. That's actually below market rate, but she's my friend was my friend, so I wanted to help her out. In 5 days, she's paid exactly $0 while complaining constantly about how expensive Seattle is and how unfair it is that some people have more money than others. The pattern was familiar. Melissa had perfected the art of making financial commitments she had no intention of keeping. When I asked her about the rent, she told me $800 was unrealistic given her salary, and that I should be more understanding since she's going through a difficult transition. This is the same person who spent $150 on brunch yesterday and posted about it on Instagram like it was a casual Tuesday. Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots. Melissa's social media had exploded with posts about finding herself, learning to recognize toxic relationships, and surrounding yourself with people who support your growth. The subtext was clear. I was the toxic relationship, and anyone who expected financial responsibility was unsupportive. But here's what really made me realize I needed to talk to you, Rachel said. She spent the last 5 days telling me all about your relationship. And Derek, the version she tells is nothing like reality. What did she say? 8. According to Melissa, you were controlling and financially manipulative. She claimed you monitored her spending, made her feel guilty for normal expenses, and essentially trapped her in a relationship where she couldn't be herself. She painted you as this possessive guy who used money as a weapon to control her behavior. I almost laughed at how absurd it was. I'd never questioned Melissa's spending, never asked her to account for anything, never restricted her access to money. She also had some interesting opinions about me, Rachel added. Apparently, I'm wasting my potential by working in pediatric therapy instead of pursuing something more lucrative. She actually suggested I should leverage my medical degree to become an influencer or wellness consultant because that's where the real opportunities are. I stared at this woman who spent her days helping children recover from injuries and illness, being criticized by someone whose biggest professional achievement was getting 4,000 Instagram followers. Rachel, that's insane. You literally help kids walk again. That's about as meaningful as work gets. She smiled for the first time since arriving. Thank you. That actually means a lot, especially coming from someone she spent so much time trash talking. We talked for another hour, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Rachel was intelligent, direct, and refreshingly honest about everything. When I offered to order dinner, she insisted on splitting the cost through Venmo before the food even arrived. Can I ask you something potentially awkward? Rachel said as we were cleaning up the pizza boxes. Would you want to get coffee sometime? Like, actual coffee, not me showing up at your place to vent about your terrible ex-girlfriend. The attraction was obvious and mutual, but I had to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Won't Melissa lose her mind about this? Melissa stopped being my friend the moment she decided I wasn't worth basic respect or financial honesty, Rachel said. Plus, after listening to her complain about you for 5 days straight, I'm pretty curious to see what you're actually like when you're not being described by someone who clearly never appreciated you. Our first real date was that Saturday at a coffee shop in Fremont that Rachel had suggested. She arrived exactly on time, engaged in genuine conversation about our work, and when the check came, she split it without hesitation. The difference from my relationship with Melissa was staggering. Melissa told me you were boring, Rachel said as we walked along the canal afterward. She specifically said you care too much about work and don't know how to have fun. What do you think? I think someone who builds their own smart home system and makes homemade pasta from scratch has a pretty interesting definition of boring. Melissa's idea of fun was spending money she didn't have on things she didn't need to impress people she didn't like. We started dating officially a week later, keeping it quiet because we both knew Melissa would eventually find out and the explosion would be spectacular. Rachel began staying over on weekends, and the contrast with my previous relationship was remarkable. She contributed to groceries without being asked, helped with household chores because she wanted to, and treated my space with genuine respect. When she used my bathroom, she cleaned up after herself. When she cooked, she did the dishes. When we watched Netflix, she actually asked what I wanted to watch instead of automatically queuing up reality shows about people whose biggest problem was choosing which yacht to charter. Has she always been this entitled? Rachel asked one Sunday morning while making us breakfast, actual breakfast with eggs and vegetables, not $15 acai bowls that looked better than they tasted. I'm starting to think I never really knew her, I admitted. Melissa discovered we were dating exactly 2 weeks later, and her reaction made her original breakup conversation look calm and rational by comparison. My phone started exploding at 6 a.m. on a Monday with texts that escalated from confused to furious in minutes. Are you seriously dating Rachel? This is so fucked up and manipulative. You're only doing this to hurt me. I can't believe you'd betray me like this. Rachel knows exactly what she's doing. This is calculated. 23 messages before 7 a.m., each one more unhinged than the last. The voicemails were worse, sobbing accusations about conspiracy and betrayal, angry rants about my true character, threats to expose me to our mutual friends. By evening, her social media had transformed into a passive-aggressive wasteland of inspirational quotes about toxic men and fake friends. My personal favorite was a quote posted over a sunset. Some people will use your own friends against you when their ego gets bruised. Meanwhile, Rachel and I were actually building something real. She'd started staying over most nights, and we'd begun discussing the possibility of her officially moving in and splitting all expenses 50-50. I want you to know, Rachel told me one evening, that I never want to be in a position where I'm financially dependent on someone else. I watched what happened with Melissa, and I saw how that dynamic corrupted everything. I want partnership, not provision. The harassment from Melissa continued for weeks. Angry texts from new numbers when I blocked the old ones. Social media posts that became increasingly obvious in their targeting. According to Connor, she'd been showing up at places she knew I frequented, apparently hoping to cause some kind of scene. Then came the financial collapse that I'd known was inevitable. Without someone subsidizing her lifestyle, Melissa's $42,000 salary proved catastrophically insufficient. The Instagram posts that had once featured expensive restaurants and designer purchases shifted to vague motivational quotes about temporary setbacks and building character through adversity. Connor reported seeing her at a Target, buying ramen noodles and using coupons. She looked absolutely miserable, he texted. It was like watching someone discover that money isn't infinite. After Rachel evicted her for non-payment of rent, Melissa had briefly bounced between other friends' couches before they all apparently tired of her financial irresponsibility and entitlement. The social media posts became increasingly desperate, thinly veiled requests for help, disguised as inspirational content about finding your tribe and learning who your real friends are. Then, according to Connor's network of bartender friends who tracked Seattle dating app disasters like anthropologists studying human behavior, Melissa connected with a 50-something divorced businessman who was willing to fund her lifestyle in exchange for companionship. Her Instagram briefly exploded back to life with photos of expensive dinners and shopping bags, captioned with quotes about finally finding a real man and upgrading your standards. The digs at me were obvious to anyone who'd followed our relationship. The arrangement lasted exactly 3 weeks before the businessman apparently discovered she was simultaneously seeing multiple other men she'd met on apps. The breakup was swift and brutal, and Melissa's social media went dark overnight. The last I heard, through Connor's network, she'd moved back to Spokane to live with her parents and was working retail while trying to rebuild her life. Whether she'd learned anything from the experience was anyone's guess. Meanwhile, Rachel officially moved into the condo 6 months after we started dating. We split the mortgage payment, utilities, groceries, and every other expense exactly 50-50. She kept her own savings account, maintained her financial independence, and contributed equally to our shared life. This is what partnership actually looks like, Rachel said one evening as we were planning a vacation we'd budgeted for together. Melissa wanted provision disguised as love, but real love is about building something together, not extracting resources from someone while contributing nothing meaningful in return. A year later, I proposed to Rachel in the same condo where Melissa had once tried to convince me that breaking up while maintaining financial dependency was somehow a healthy evolution of our relationship. Rachel said yes before I'd even finished asking, and we planned a wedding that we'd pay for together, split exactly down the middle. Sometimes people don't realize what they're throwing away until they see someone else building something real with it. Melissa had wanted the benefits of a relationship without the commitment or contribution. Rachel showed me what actual partnership looked like: 2 people building a life together, sharing expenses and dreams and responsibilities equally. The difference wasn't just financial, though that was certainly part of it. The difference was respect. Rachel respected me enough to be honest about what she wanted, to contribute equally to what we were building, to treat our relationship as a genuine partnership rather than a financial arrangement with occasional companionship. Melissa had wanted to be roommates while I paid the rent and she dated other men. In the end, she got exactly what she asked for. She became a roommate, just not in my home. And I got something infinitely better: a real partner who understood that love isn't about finding someone to subsidize your lifestyle, but about building a life together where both people contribute, sacrifice, and grow. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply building a better life with someone who actually deserves it.